Daryl entered the Prestige Motors car dealership, the flagship agency he recently bought in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. The desert heat reflected off the luxurious cars parked outside, making their shiny surfaces seem to glow under the sun's rays. After noon, Daryl parked his simple, multi-purpose sports car in an unspecified place in the back and stepped out of it, contemplating the front of the dealership. For a moment, he wasn't wearing anything that drew attention. Quite the opposite. He wore a simple grey sweater, slightly worn jeans, and sports shoes. And this was his look for the day. His decision to dress informally was deliberate. He wanted to see the true colors of the dealership and test how they operate when no one knows the new boss is watching. As he headed towards the entrance, he noticed a small group of employees inside exchanging conversation near the front desk. Light laughter and casual conversations echoed through the glass doors. Daryl opened the door and entered. The air-conditioned atmosphere of the showroom was a complete contrast to the heat outside, laden with the scent of leather and fresh wax, rows of clean cars gleaming under the bright lights. The conversation stopped when he entered, and furtive glances began to be exchanged among the employees, focusing on his suit and his athletic shoes. He felt a subtle shift in the energy, the kind that speaks louder than words, but he wasn't here to make judgments, just to observe. Then from the other side of the exhibit, Susan appeared, a woman in her midlife, with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. Her formal attire and high heels exuded authority. While she added a touch of efficiency to her notepad under her arm, she approached him with decisive steps, and the sound of her heels echoed on the glossy floor. Her features were a stark contrast to the initial chaos, but Daryl noticed a waver in her smile. Susan began in a calm and composed voice, "Can I assist you with something?" Daryl smiled gently, responding in a relaxed tone. "I just want to look around." He gestured towards the cars. Susan's eyes narrowed as she scanned him from head to toe. A chill ran down her face, and her tone became less welcoming. "Are you looking to buy a car?" she asked, a note of suspicion in her voice. Daryl shook his head, a smile confirming something of the sort. Susan's lips thinned slightly. "Well, we serve very specific clientele here. Most of our cars require pre-qualification. Perhaps I can recommend." Before she could finish, one of the employees called out, "Hey Susan, the delivery guy is here." Her attention wavered for a moment, but she quickly refocused on Daryl, as if making sure he didn't stray too far. Daryl raised an eyebrow, but kept a calm demeanor. "Are you implying that I'm incompetent?" She seemed surprised by the question, but only for a brief moment. She quickly regained her composure and adjusted her stance. "I'm just trying to save your time," she said with a forced smile. "These cars start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you." Daryl's expression didn't change, but he registered her words internally. He was calm, but the sting of assumptions couldn't be denied. He looked around the showroom, feigning interest in a nearby car. It was a sleek silver coupe with an aggressive design. He touched the door handle and looked back at Susan. "Another beautiful car," he said simply, his eyebrows slightly raised, but it forced another smile. "Yes, perhaps when you're ready for serious inquiry we can set a date, but for now, I'll ask you not to touch the cars." Daryl paused for a moment, considering her words, then stepped away from the car, nodded his head, put his hands in his pockets, and gestured for her to continue. "All right, tell me what you recommend for someone like me?" Susan blinked in surprise at his direct question, but before she could respond, Daryl added, "If you thought you knew what I needed, I'm listening," challenging her professional confidence, revealing a hint of his patience wearing thin. "Perhaps something more economical. I can refer you to a dealership that specializes in used cars." Daryl smiled faintly, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He had seen enough. "Those were very serious allegations," he said calmly, his words hanging in the air. For a brief moment, Susan was taken aback, but she quickly composed herself and adjusted her stance. "I'll come back with a list of options," she said that as she quickly walked away. Daryl watched her as she left. His expression was unreadable. Then he turned again towards the silver screen, where his image was reflected in the glowing light. He realized then that this day would be of interest. Daryl stood in the middle of the showroom, his hands in his pockets, his eyes roaming over the rows of cars. No one was jumping to conclusions, but Susan's high-handed behavior was hard to ignore. The employees returned to their conversations, although Daryl noticed fleeting glances directed at him every now and then. It was the kind of scrutiny he had grown accustomed to over the years. The silent judgments and the glaring looks. Susan returned after a few moments, her grip on the clipboard as if it were a shield, her quick steps and forced smile reflecting her annoyance. "Well," she said, stopping. A few steps away from him, she gathered some options that might be more suitable for your situation. Daryl tilted his head slightly. "My situation?" "Yes," Susan replied in a subdued tone, handing him a sheet containing used cars, with detailed specifications and prices lower than what the agency usually offers. These are models that are easier to access, reliable, economical, and practical. Daryl took the paper without a hint of a smile, his eyes scanning the page. A used sedan, a multi-purpose sports car, and a small coupe that smirked slightly, but he quickly hid it. He put the long paper in his pocket. "Do you appreciate your effort?" he said in a balanced tone. Susan was surprised for a moment, but she quickly regained her calm, put her hand on her waist, listened, said, and lowered her voice, as if she was going to share a secret. "I'm just trying to be real with you. Prestige Motors isn't for everyone, and I don't want to waste your time." Daryl's gaze met hers, and his expressions were calm but firm. "And what makes you think I'm not one of your targeted employees?" Susan hesitated for a moment, then said, "I've been working here for a long time. I can tell when someone is out of their league, out of their league." Daryl said in a contemplative tone, closer to intrigue. A hint of fear appeared in Susan's eyes, but she continued, "I'm just being honest. It's better to be straightforward, rather than leaving one of us in the dark." Feeling a glimmer of hope, Daryl laughed softly and shook his head slightly. "Honesty, isn't it something? I like that. How about you let me talk to the boss?" "Can we arrange that?" Susan's eyebrows shot up in real surprise for the first time. "The boss?" "Yes," Daryl said lightly, closer to casual conversation. "I'd like to talk to him." Susan's lips twitched in a failed attempt to smile nicely. "This is not possible today. The boss doesn't come here for mere visits. He's a busy man, I'm sure of that," Daryl said, nodding his head. "But maybe you can contact him and tell him I'm here. I think he'd be interested in meeting me." Susan's smile intensified, and her impatience grew visibly. "Look, sir, I tried to be as patient as possible, but this is becoming difficult for me. Other employees need assistance. If you are serious about buying a car, we can schedule a meeting with one of our sales consultants. Other than that, what?" Daryl will ask in a calm tone, but with a slight edge. Susan narrowed her eyes, and anger began to rise within her. "As for anything else, I will have to ask you to leave." Daryl remained standing, his gaze fixed on her for a moment. He began to recite the proposal in its entirety. She held her breath. Then slowly Daryl pulled his phone from his pocket. "All right," he said as he scrolled through his contacts. "I'll call myself." Susan blinked in surprise. "What is he doing?" "Are you going to call the owner?" Daryl asked as he raised the phone to his ear. "This won't take long." Susan's confidence began to wane, and her clear confusion set in. The employees opened their mouths in shock and stopped working. Watching the scene, Daryl raised his finger as if to say, "Just a moment," and managed a small smile. "Yes, I'm here at the agency. Everything is fine. Just a simple misunderstanding. Can you tell them I'm here?" "Oui." He ended the call and returned the phone to his pocket, then turned to Susan. "They will be here soon," he said simply. Susan looked puzzled. "Who is it? Who did you call?" Daryl didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the employees who were watching expectantly. He said in a relaxed tone. The silence was broken before the main doors opened, and a stylish man wearing a suit like Mr. Carter's walked in. The man said with a smile as he extended his hand. Daryl responded to the handshake with a light smile. "Thanks for coming, Alex." Susan's expression turned to shock at the sight of Mr. Carter. Alex turned to her with a sharp professional look. "Susan, I see you've met your new agency owner." Susan stammered. "I didn't know. What didn't you tell me?" Daryl asked calmly, "Can someone like me own this place?" I stammered again. "I'm sorry." Daryl raised his hand abruptly. "This is good, but ask yourself, if I wasn't the owner, would you treat me with the same respect?" Silence filled the room, and that was answer enough. Daryl smiled slightly. "We'll all meet in the conference room. we have an important discussion about how to manage this agency. The employees gathered in the sleek conference room, where the glass walls and modern design exuded sophistication, but the atmosphere today was charged with tension. Susan sat at the back, her usual confidence waning, clutching her notepad as if it were a shield. Daryl stood at the head of the table, calm and composed, commanding everyone's attention, while Alex stood by the door, his hands clasped as he watched the employees take their seats. Soft whispers quickly faded as Daryl prepared to speak, his gaze sweeping over the attendees before he began to speak in a balanced tone that was nonetheless commanding. Thank you for joining me on such short notice. For those who don't know me, my name is Daryl Carter. Since last month, I have become the new owner of Prestige Motors. Soft murmurs from some of the employees, ranging from shock to confusion. Some tried to avoid looking at him, while Susan sunk deeper into her seat. Daryl continued in a calm voice, but his words carried weight. I came today in casual clothes for a reason. I wanted to see how this agency operates when no one knows me. I wanted to test what any potential agent might feel when they walk through these doors. He paused for a moment, letting his words echo in their ears, before he continued what he was saying. Today was disappointing to say the least. I was judged not based on what I could offer, but on my appearance. And I'm not saying this to point fingers, but to ask ourselves, what does this say about our work culture? Susan fidgeted uncomfortably, blushing. Daryl glanced at her briefly before looking back at the others. The matter doesn't just concern me, but every person who walks through these doors. Every buyer may not fit the stereotypical image you have of who purchases a luxury car. One of the young salesmen raised his hand hesitantly, while Adriel nodded his head, saying, "Please?" The employee said with clear fear, "Mr. Carter, I believe most of us try to treat customers fairly, but sometimes it's hard not to make assumptions." Adriel nodded understandingly. "I understand that. We all have biases, whether we admit it or not, but it's not just about trying. We have to confront those biases consciously. We need to create an environment where everyone feels respected, regardless of their appearance, background, or anything else. Pause for a moment, then continue. This agency I built on the basis of distinction. But the distinction is not only in the cars we sell, but in the experience we provide. And from now on, this experience will be built on respect, inclusivity, and fairness." The whispers started to agree, but there were some puzzled faces. Daryl looked again at Susan, who was frozen in her place, her hands clenched on the notepad. He said in a calm but decisive tone, "Susan, I want to give you a chance to speak. Do you have something you want to say?" All eyes turned to her. She hesitated for a moment, then said in a faint voice, "I made a mistake. I have wronged you, and for that I am truly sorry." Or what Daryl understood with his head and his neutral expressions. "Thank you for acknowledging that, and I hope this experience serves as a reminder to us all, not just to you, that change begins with taking responsibility." Then he addressed everyone. "We will start implementing new training programs to ensure that this agency reflects the values I believe in. Every employee deserves to be treated with dignity, without exceptions. If anyone has a problem with that, now is the appropriate time to speak up." The room fell silent, and no one dared to speak. Daryl let this silence linger for a moment, then said confidently, "It seems we are all in agreement. Change is not always easy, but it is necessary, and this agency will lead the change through example." He approached the table slightly and put his hands on it. He continued in a deep tone, "I didn't come here today to fire anyone. I came to understand the kind of culture that has been inherited and how we can improve it." Then he looked again at Susan and said in a more serious tone, "Lena Susan, you are an experienced manager, and I am confident that you have worked hard to get here. But today was like a warning bell for all of us." Susan finally raised her head and looked at him with teary eyes. "I understand I was wrong, and I will do everything necessary to correct that." Daryl smiled slightly and said, "I believe in second chances, but responsibility comes first. I will meet with you individually to discuss the next steps. And now, let's focus on moving forward." Then he addressed everyone again. "We don't just sell cars. We build trust. We create relationships, and we represent a standard of excellence. If you are committed to that, I am here to support you every step of the way." The room hummed with agreement. This time it was more genuine. The employees felt relieved, as the waves of turmoil began to fade, to be replaced by a real desire for change. Even Alex, who remained standing by the door, or Mr. A with his head nodding in agreement, Dari smiled a light smile carrying a mix of relief and pride. All right, let's get to work. And remember, the way we treat people is more important than anything we sell. The employees began to leave the room, but Susan stopped at the door and approached him nervously. Mr. Carter, she said in a low voice, thank you for the opportunity to be better. I won't let you down. Daryl looked at her for a moment, then replied in a steady tone, I hope you're serious about that, Susan. Actions speak louder than words, but I believe people can change if they want to, or if Susan is sincere, I will act. Daryl left before turning to Alex, saying, we'll meet with the team next week. I want everyone to be sure of my future expectations. Alex smiled approvingly. Yes, boss. While Daryl returned to the showroom, contemplating the gleaming cars under the sunlight. He thought about the amount of work waiting for him, but he finally felt optimistic.